So now we're going to start, and I'm just going to kind of shake up the order, and each is going to get a 1-minute introduction. And candidates, you all have your own microphone. Hopefully they work. So Mary, I'm going to start with you for your 1-minute introduction.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you so much for providing this wonderful forum. My name is Mary Peltola, a Gaslunga, Yupiugo Mamtresakmi. I'm a Yupik Eskimo from Bethel, Alaska. I served in the Alaska State Legislature. I was elected in 1998 and served through '08. I have a vested interest in Alaska. I've got 4 kids, 3 stepkids, and 2 grandkids. And I'm very pleased to be in the race with these fine fellow Alaskans. Thank you.
You just want to go down the road, Sarah?
Okay, sure. I'm Sarah Palin. Thank you for being here on this glorious Alaskan summer day. It's tough for a lot of us to be indoors on a day like this. But thank you for making time and for being in the arena, for caring so much about our wonderful state, about our country, that you are participants. You're walking the walk, not just talking the talk when it comes to involvement and understanding what the current issues are and understanding how important it is that we do send someone to D.C. to try to fill Don Young's shoes. Of course, impossible to do so. 49 years serving us in the 49th state. Amazing, amazing individual. So acknowledging that it's impossible to fill his shoes, I just really appreciate the opportunity to be able to kind of apply for a job is how I'm looking at this. Is if you'll have me as a representative of your interests, Alaska's interests, it'd be the honor of a lifetime. And I want to say hi to Tara Sweeney, also, who is here. We love her, and we thank her for all her service and know that she's going to continue doing what she's been doing. She's wonderful for Alaska.
I am Nick Begich III. A lot of people wonder, how in the world does a Begich become a Republican? Well, I was raised outside of Alaska by my grandparents down in the free state of Florida, and raised in the church, K through 12 Christian school. Went to Baylor University undergrad, where I picked up a degree in business with a focus in entrepreneurship. Later went to Indiana University, where I picked up an MBA with a focus in information technology and decision sciences. Worked at Ford Motor Company for a few years and decided that Detroit and the surrounding area was probably not the best place for us to raise our family, and my wife and I decided to come back to Alaska almost 20 years ago. I own a software development company. We are global in scope. I've been an entrepreneur for the last 16 years and an investor helping others grow businesses and enterprise through entrepreneurship. I believe that the state of Alaska has tremendous potential, and with the proper representation, we can make an effective business case for the state down in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. And now, just a reminder, you get 1:30 for these longer form questions. And Nick, I'll start with you on this next one, and then we'll just go down the row. Although you are all in the race for the long-term general election, if you win in August, you may have a limited time to complete Representative Young's term. What is your first task, and what do you hope to accomplish?
Well, I think the biggest challenge facing our nation today is that of inflation. And we've got a Congress that has completely divorced itself from the fundamentals of economics through profligate spending. There seems to be no end to the wish list of priorities coming out of D.C., but we simply don't have the money necessary to pursue everything. One of the things that I think that we need to do is we need to start unlocking energy production within the United States to regain our position of energy dominance. I think that Alaska has a huge role to play as it relates to our energy security, our national security, and our mineral security. And as we move forward in the Congress, I think, again, we've got to make that strong business case for the state of Alaska to unlock the true potential of our state as a solution to the crises that are facing our nation, chief of which is, again, inflation.
Sarah, first task if you're elected.
Definitely to win the war against President Biden's anti-energy independent agenda that he's engaged in. And Alaska has such a role in this. Alaska, we need to be the leaders in energy independence in America. We are the Fort Knox of America when you consider the oil, the gas, the minerals, the fisheries, all of our wonderful natural resources that God has provided us for ethical, responsible use of mankind. Alaska needs to be tapped into. You guys in the private sector especially, you guys know how, when it comes to these natural resource development projects, you know how to do it best. You understand worker safety, you understand environmental protections, all those things that we're proud of here in Alaska. We do it right, natural resource development projects, versus, say, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, all these countries now that the administration thinks it has to go hat in hand to ask these other countries to develop resources so that we can use their resources. It makes no sense. Alaska is just absolutely the leaders on doing things right when it comes to developing resources, creating jobs. We can help secure the rest of America if we tap into our resources, if government will get out of the way and allow the access and the primacy that Alaska needs.
Julie, you did mention this is just the tail end, and this special election would just be for a 4-month, very temporary seat. And having served, like I said a minute ago, for 10 years in the legislative body, having served on various committees, I was very successful in passing legislation despite being in the minority. So I understand it takes more than 4 months to develop positive working relationships. But certainly, even though this is a lame duck year for Congress, there still are things that we need to do. We've got to make sure that that $1.6 to $1.8 billion for the Port of Anchorage is addressed. We've got to be developing positive relationships with the other members of Congress in order to impress upon them the importance of Alaska's oil and gas resources needing to be developed. I think that providing America with more petroleum products will reduce inflation. It will help us get out of this recession that we're just now getting into. Of course, will work very hard, as Dawn did. Dawn really was a champion and a strong advocate for infrastructure projects, making sure Alaska gets its fair share and putting Alaskans to work. And those are all the priorities that I'll be working on. And on top of mind right now is Roe v. Wade. I am interested in working on codifying into federal statute protections regarding Roe v. Wade. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, Sarah Palin, we'll go ahead and start with you. Former Congressman Young was known for working across the aisle and even breaking with his party if he thought it was good for Alaska. He was reported to have recently said that party divisions within Congress are hindering it from properly functioning. What commitments can you make, if elected, to decrease the amount of partisan bickering? Please be specific.
Well, I'm, of course, willing to work with the other side of the aisle. I've done that my entire career in politics, and I started 30 years ago in Alaska, starting out PTA, PTO, city council, mayor, manager of the city, oil and gas commissioner, and then governor, and then vice presidential candidate. And it seemed to be, I was always having to buck my party in one sense or another. And I think that people know that I'm willing to stand up for the interests of the people whom I'm serving versus be obsessively partisan to the point of not having the ability to fight for what's right. And so, of course, if the other side will come to the debate, to the discussion, to the arena with the good ideas that will help hardworking Alaskans, our families, our businesses, our communities, I'm not going to compromise my values, my ideals when it comes to what public service is all about, just in order to make a deal, to strike a deal, that leads to participation in a good old boys club, and I'm totally against that, both sides of the aisle. So yeah, absolutely, as an individual, hopefully in Congress, I will do my part in being willing to work with the other side, but again, not compromising to the point of doing anything that would strike a deal that isn't in Alaska's best interest.
Okay, Nick Begich? Partisan bickering, how are we going to reduce it?
Well, doing what is right is never about a party. It's about doing what's right for Alaska and what's right for the nation. And if that means reaching across the aisle, then that's what it means. I think at the end of the day, Don provided an example of that. I agree with Sarah that we can't compromise our values in the process. You know, there is much more common ground than we believe that there is or we are told that there is. And I believe that both sides of the aisle have the best interests of the nation at heart. And we've got to work hard to find those areas of common interest, that we can pass legislation that's in the best interest of the American people and of Alaskans. And I believe, once again, that some of that legislation relates to our energy security, our national security, our mineral security. And when we take a look at how many of the minerals that we're relying on now are mined around the world, let's take cobalt as a great example. 70% of the world's cobalt is mined under conditions in the Congo that are deplorable. Horrible conditions, child labor, no environmental standards. We can do that work right. We do that work well here in the state of Alaska. And we need a champion down in D.C. that can take that argument across the aisle and move some of these priority projects through that are for the good of the nation and for the good of the state.
Mary Peltola, what steps could you take to help reduce partisan bickering?
Okay, thank you. Like I said, I served as a Democrat for 10 years and worked very well with my Republican colleagues. I quickly learned that you have to have 59 best friends in the Alaska State Legislature to be effective. And I reinvigorated the Bush Caucus, which was comprised of 10 rural legislators, half of whom were Republicans. I realize now that Alaska has one congressional seat, so I'm going to have to go from thinking of 59 best friends to 434 best friends. I can see why Dawn needed to be there 49 years to really kind of develop those positive relationships. But and I'm not joking here. You cannot represent a rural district the size of Oregon if you are looking at things through a partisan lens and looking at partisan platforms. And Alaska certainly has to work with every reasonable person we can to move our state forward, move our nation forward, regardless of party. And I think I really walk that talk. I really believe in respectfulness and civility and not using any kind of inflammatory language. So you have my commitment. I will work in a bipartisan way as I always have.
Thank you. And Mary, I'm going to have you go first since you haven't had the chance yet. So if you want to just hang on to that microphone. Okay. Gas prices now average more than $5 a gallon across the country. Given this importance to national security and our economy, and every family has to fill up, are you in favor of accelerating the development of our own oil and gas resources? And if yes, what can be done quickly to development in the U.S. and Alaska, but besides U.S. production, any other ideas to lower gas prices?
Yeah, I am very intimately aware of the petroleum product cost throughout Alaska, and I think we can all attest to our discretionary income really going down with these. Our petroleum has gone up twice, 3 times as much. I know. In Anchorage, we're paying a lot, but in rural parts, they're paying twice or 3 times as much what we're paying here in Anchorage. Alaska can be part of a national solution. Oil and gas developed in Alaska has the fewest environmental impacts in the world. It will be my job to articulate the importance of reasonable oil and gas development to our nation. We need to also be championing renewable energy. I know that's a question coming up. And I don't think it's an either or, gas and oil or renewables. I think it has to be both. And I really believe that we need to find ways to get our natural gas, using our natural gas resources as well as our oil resources. Thank you.
You just want to go down the line, Sarah Palin?
Okay, sure. Yeah, $140 to fuel up my truck the other day, and that's absolutely appalling. And I'm thinking, and I'm blessed, having been blessed with opportunities to have an income to be able to afford to fuel up my truck, though it does hurt. And looking around at so many Alaskans who aren't in the same position that I am, that I want to work for those people to make sure that they can put food on their tables so that they can fuel up their vehicles. We had kind of a funny argument thinking about driving into Anchorage today from the valley, like, well, who's going to drive? Well, my truck costs $140. Well, okay, well, my little car is better on gas. I'm like, yeah, but what if we hit a moose? We're going to get squished. And I know that firsthand, what happens when you hit a moose, because that happened to me a couple weeks ago. That's the sign of a true Alaskan. I took a moose out of season. But anyway, it's all about access to our natural resources. There is limited supply, but only because of political will, only because of government regulations and government's agenda from the top brass. Saying, no, we're going to keep ANWR locked up. We're not going to allow federal lands to be tapped into. We have to fight against Biden's 30 by 30 plan, where he says by 2030, 30% of federal lands are going to be locked up. We're not going to be able to access our natural resources. Alaska already suffers much more than 30% of our federal lands being locked up. We have got to have Congress be educated enough to make the decisions, because our president won't.
Okay, Nick Begich, let me refresh the question. What can be done quickly to increase oil and gas production or other ideas you have to lower gas prices?
Well, right off the gate, we can improve the Willow Project. The Willow Project is real production right around the corner, 150,000 barrels a day through the pipeline. That's something that we need to be doing right away. We need to release federal lands so that we can start to lease those lands again. These are immediate actions that can be taken. You know, at the end of the day, it seems as though the Biden administration has been completely disconnected from the real problems that everyday Americans have. You know, low and middle income families are suffering right now with the cost of food, fuel, housing, all rising, and you know, people are changing the decisions that they're making. They're changing the decisions they're making. Should they go to the grocery store today, or should they combine it into one trip? Should they take their kids to soccer practice? Should they do these things that before were not even a thought? And the Biden administration needs to reconnect with everyday Americans and make sure that they're doing everything they can do to lower the cost of energy. Energy costs work their way into virtually every economic activity that we have in this nation, and by failing to do so, they're failing the American people.
Okay, next question, and Sarah, we'll go ahead and start with you. A move toward renewable energy is underway across the world, the U.S., and in Alaska. There are many vocal supporters. Advocates are calling for more sources of renewable energy. Recognizing we are an energy state with a rich history in oil and gas production, what renewable energy sources or projects do you support going forward?
Yeah, there are a lot of potential renewable energy source projects that Alaska can participate in, but it's this false narrative that we're hearing out there from too many on the left who are saying, well, we can jump into renewable energy economy right now. We can't. That's false thinking. It's going to take years and years and years before we absolutely are transitioned into renewable energy resources that are tapped into, that are created in order to energize our country. In the meantime, we have got to have the ethical and responsible resource development projects that, again, Alaska is known for, and we have to make sure that we're educating those around the country and around Congress. We have to have good connections with other people in Congress in order to educate them and let them know how important it is that, yeah, we responsibly develop what we have today. That's reality. Do you guys remember back when Alaska was supplying 16 to 18% of the U.S. domestic supply of energy? We had 2 million barrels of American crude flowing down our pipeline. Now we're about 400,000 barrels a day. The resource is there. We just need the allowance by government to tap into it and flow that crude down in order to sustain us, make us solvent, make us sovereign, our nation, and then from there, deal with renewable projects.
Nick Begich, which renewable energy sources or projects do you see supporting going forward?
Well, Alaska has the world's largest graphite deposit, or rather North America's largest graphite deposit, with Graphite 1 up on the Seward Peninsula. We've got the Palmer VMS project down near Haines that provides a number of base metal components necessary for renewable energy. We've got lithium on the Seward Peninsula and some early exploration that's going on there, large drilling project going on out there this year. UCOR has a rare earth element project down in Southeast. We have all the resources that we need in this nation to have a domestic, vertically integrated supply chain from raw resources all the way through to production. but we have got to develop those resources. Now, Alaska, again, we have the answer to America's renewable energy question. And right now, we are heavily reliant on China and nations abroad to provide these resources to us. You know, it impacts our ability to weigh in on foreign policy as a result, and restricts our ability to participate in the renewable energy economy going forward into the future. We have got to make sure that Alaska's resources are properly represented down in D.C., that people have an understanding of what is possible up here, and that we've got a strong voice of advocacy for those resources as we move forward.
Mary.
Thank you, Julie. I mentioned this a moment ago, but I do support renewable energy and the development of it and scaling it up. Again, I was very proud of the work that the Bush Caucus did on renewables. One example is the Chininak Wind Group. It's 4 villages on the coast, and the amount of diesel they've been able to displace in terms of home heating and even powering their ATVs has been quite substantial, and it's a proven success story. I support residential, I know that Alaska is a world leader in microgrids. We have over 200 microgrids in Alaska, and this is within the last 15 years these things have come about. I think there are a lot more technologies that are off the shelf, and consumers can access them with a lot more ease. We've got, people think of Alaska as cold and dark, and I mean, we're all tan. We've all been enjoying our great state. We've got wind, solar, tidal, hydro, and geothermal. I think Anchorage has done a good job with Fire Island. I think there are more success stories in terms of neighborhoods putting solar panels in. I know we're a leader in this field, and we can only get stronger if we stay committed to this.
Thank you. For this question, we'll go Nick, Mary, and then Sarah. So Mary doesn't have to go last each time. Okay, the Port of Alaska is the state's most important piece of infrastructure and one of the 17 U.S. ports designated as strategic infrastructure by the U.S. military. The piles supporting the cargo docks have reached their end of life, and a plan is in place to rebuild the port. The project will require funding from a combination of sources and must attain federal permits before construction can begin. This rehabilitation has been the #1 priority of the Anchorage Chamber for as long as I've been on the board. So just knowing that, where does rebuilding the Port of Alaska rank among your list of funding priorities, and how will you help secure federal funding to rebuild the port and accelerate the permitting process?
Well, this ranks very high on the list of priorities. When you look at the Port of Alaska, you're talking about critical infrastructure for ensuring food security for Alaskans, continued and uninterrupted economic activity within the state, and also ensuring that we can continue to execute on our national security mission here in the state of Alaska. One of the challenges that we see with respect to the port is that what we all know, this is a single point of failure for the state. That's also a risk. So we need to address the issues with the port, but then we need to look at additional investments that will reduce that single point of failure risk for the state of Alaska. That includes additional port investments in places like Homer and Seward and Nome. It includes opening up the state to international rail coming through Canada. It includes adding roads that allow us to access a greater portion of the state of Alaska. We've got to make sure we're making hard infrastructure investments in order to reduce the single point of failure risk that comes with the Port of Alaska's current state, and we need to absolutely make sure that the priority remains repair that port.
It's imperative. Oh, I'm sorry.
It doesn't matter. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, see how polite she is? This is the way it should be in politics. It is imperative, that we fortify that port for decades to come. We're talking national security issues when it comes to Alaska's port. The federal government has such a limited role, supposed to have such a limited role in our lives. The federal government spending's out of control, so it's not a matter of whether the federal government can help provide funds for our port. They're spending money anyway. It's a matter of priorities. When we talk about national security, that is a role of our federal government. The federal government was set up to protect our individual rights, not take away any rights, and to deal with national security. So it is a matter of priorities. Infrastructure is so critically important federal government, state government, cooperating on funding the improvements to this port that, again, it is imperative. We have to leverage relationships that we have in Congress, not just educating our fellow congressmen and women, but educating also their constituents, because they need to be able to vote for the projects that we need, including the port. And Julie's right. This has been top priority, I know, of Chamber, of so many people, especially in the private sector, for decades. We've been talking about it forever. So it's time that action is finally taken. Yeah, it's imperative.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Anchorage really is the center of the Alaskan universe, and just the name Anchorage says it all. The town's name is really after the Port of Anchorage. The port really is our origin story. All of our essential commodities come through that port. It is our logistics supply chain. It is about food security, and it's also a heavy lift. We're going to need everybody invested in this project. It's $1.6 to $1.8 billion. So this is critical to our existence in Alaska, and certainly moving forward in our future of Alaska. And with the number of earthquakes that we have, we do need to make sure that those pilings are safe and that they're fit for the seismic activity that Anchorage is prone to. But even the logo of Anchorage is about the Port of Anchorage. So this really is the priority infrastructure need for Alaska at this time.
Thank you. Mary, I'm going to have you go first, and then we'll go Mary, Nick, Sarah. Okay. Following the most recent mass shootings in our country, which are sometimes daily, recent polling shows an increasing number of Americans support some form of gun restrictions. What specific gun control measures, if any, do you support?
I am a strong advocate for Second Amendment rights. Guns are very much, they have been a part of my history. They're in every home in rural Alaska, practically, both for subsistence and for protection. But I am encouraged by the small amount of conversations that have been going on in DC. I think it's critical as Americans that we get dangerous weapons out of the hands of criminals, out of the hands of mentally ill, out of the hands of domestic violence perpetrators. Certainly, there has to be a way that we can accomplish that task and maintain our Second Amendment rights. Thank you.
Nick?
Well, I am also a very strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I believe that is foundational to the formation of our nation and is something that should be preserved. I do believe that we have a mental health crisis in our nation, and it's something that we need to address, particularly among our nation's youth. We need greater access to treatment for mental health issues, and we need to take a closer look at what the true root causes of many of these mass shootings are. They're devastating. As a father of a 10-year-old son, I cannot even imagine what must go through the minds and the hearts of those affected by these mass shootings. We've got to do more to address some of the misunderstandings that are happening in this nation at an early age. We've got to do more on social media and address the effects that social media has to actually divide the country rather than bring it together. And I think these are some challenges that we need to work on in a bipartisan fashion in the Congress, but I'm a very strong supporter of our Second Amendment rights.
As am I, and there is not another law that can be added to the books that will prohibit a bad guy from doing what the bad guy is set out to do. There isn't another law that can be added. Look at the areas like Baltimore and Chicago, where they have these sky-high death tolls from mass shooters, from shooters who don't abide by any law, and they're not going to. So look at the areas that, not just the communities, the states that have more freedoms when it comes to self-protection, but look at organizations like the NRA. I'm a lifetime member of the NRA, and I'm proud of that, and it's appalling when the NRA is blamed for any kind of mass shooting. When has any law-abiding member of the NRA ever been a part of any kind of mass shooting? Organizations like that, what we're trying to do is protect and not infringe upon American liberties, upon rights that are bestowed us that government cannot be taking away. I'll fight tooth and nail for any kind of movement, any kind of issue that results in any of our individual rights being taken away, and that includes the right to bear arms to protect ourselves and our families.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Let's see, who wants to go first? Okay. Mary, you want to go first? No, she said. Okay. Sure, okay. The economy is in rough shape. Inflation is at 40-year highs, and the threat of a recession looms over the business community. What actions will you take in Congress? We've talked about gas prices, we've talked about oil production, but what actions will you take in Congress to get the economy back on the right track and help Alaskans who are dealing with these challenges?
I think that the infrastructure bill that was passed was very good for Alaska. I think that it's really important that we pace out those projects and those investments so that we're not overcharging the economy at once, overstimulating the economy at once. I believe we need to reduce the federal deficit to take pressure off the money supply. We need to increase minimum wage and index that to the cost of living. I think that's an important piece for working families. We need to get preschools. It's hard, I know a lot of employers are finding it hard to get employees when they have childcare issues and we don't have broad-based preschool options for families. The federal government spends billions of dollars every year in Alaska, and yet most Alaskan businesses are not able to tap into those billions of federal dollars. I will work to make federal spending in Alaska as impactful as possible for our small businesses.
Go ahead, Sarah.
We need to fight and win the battle against, like, Biden's 30 by 30 plan. Again, Biden has set out to lock up 30% of our federal lands by the year 2030, and all that means is Americans will be less and less accessible to their natural resources, and we're going to be more and more reliant on dangerous and dirty sources of energy from elsewhere. Other countries are going to own America if we continue down the path that we're going. This all has to do with inflation and the economy. We also have to make sure that we fight and win the battle against the Clean Water Act. There are provisions in that act that will prohibit construction projects in Alaska, across America, when it comes to discharge, in and out of, even, you can interpret some parts of the act, mud puddles, you guys, and some bureaucrat can interpret that as reason to shut down permits to be able to build this country. I would also fight to re-implement Trump's tax cuts. The less tax we have, the more that you in the private sector are able to keep and reinvest the fruits of your labor, to hire more people, to supply more of the needs in this country. All of that will chip away at the problem that we're facing, this oncoming recession, if we don't get a handle on this real soon. And we do have to control this out of control federal spending. Again, countries are going to own us if we keep this up.
Nick Begich, steps Congress can take to get the economy back on the right track.
Well, I think Congress is directly responsible for the economy going off track in the first place. And it's been my contention that when you spend at the levels and the rate at which Congress has been spending, inflation is the natural result. What we've seen is an accommodative policy from the Federal Reserve, a monetary policy that is detrimental to the nation. As monetary velocity kicked up through the economy, we saw all of this free cash flowing through rapidly, chasing the same fixed number of goods and services. And in those situations, you're going to naturally get an inflationary result. We see now that the Fed is having to dramatically increase rates, which is restricting home ownership and restricting business investment as a result. And additionally, they're engaging in quantitative tightening, which means they're actually reducing now their $9 trillion balance sheet that they accumulated. In fact, nearly 40% of all the money that circulates in the economy today was printed in the last 2 to 3 years. This is an abuse of the U.S. dollar. It's an abuse of our international reserve currency status, and it's something that the Congress needs to stand up and take a strong stand against. I don't think additional government spending is going to fix the problem. I think we've got to move back to confidence in the private sector And I think the private sector is going to be what actually gets us out of this inflationary environment.
Thank you. Nick, we'll go ahead and start with you because you have the mic. So last week, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, a law that many thought had been settled for the last 50 years. What is your reaction to what the Supreme Court did, and where do we go from here? Please share your thoughts.
So my view is that under the 10th Amendment, any powers not specifically enumerated to the federal government are reserved for the states. We have a constitutional amendment process by which we may modify provisions related to this specific issue, but I think the court was correct in returning this issue to the states. And here in the state of Alaska, as most of you are probably aware, our laws will not change at this time. It will now become the discussion for our state legislature.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I've been saying for years that Roe versus Wade was misguided in terms of where it landed in the federal government, that far off, faceless bureaucrats in some bubble, far away. They're going to make decisions for us as individuals and as a state when it comes to an issue as important as abortion. No, it should be a state's issue. So I agree with the Supreme Court and had looked forward to this for years and years, that finally the state, the people, through their representatives, their will be done when it comes to this issue of abortion. Let me talk real specifically and super, just as candidly and short on a personal level, how important I think it is that people are aware of what all is involved in the legislation when it comes to abortion. Personally, I have a son with special needs. I was given that option, of course, to end his life before it really even began. I was scared to death. It was the biggest challenge I ever faced in terms of not knowing if I was going to be able to handle the challenge that society told me was coming, the child with special needs. What I have found, and I want other parents to be less afraid than I was when they find out, say, a diagnosis of a child with special needs, is what seems to be your life's greatest challenge can turn into your life's greatest blessing. That has happened to me when I look at my son. I know there's purpose in his life. There's reason that he was born. And I just want others to understand that and not be so scared of what's ahead when they face an unexpected pregnancy.
Mary, your reaction to the Roe v. Wade decision last week.
Thank you, Julie. I understand that 65% of Alaskans are pro-choice. I personally believe in a woman's right to her own reproductive health. One of the unfortunate elements of histories of women who are in minorities, Alaska Native women, we have a history of women being sterilized against their knowledge and without their consent. Reproductive rights are as personal of an issue as you could possibly get. I do not believe, this is one area I do not believe the federal government, or for that matter, the state government, has say-so in your personal body. I believe in, Alaska as a state legalized abortion before Roe v. Wade was the law of the land. And I think it's important that now, post Roe v. Wade, we need to also protect those rights. And I think this is especially important for women of color, minority women, and women of low income. So I am in strong support of pro-choice and Roe v. Wade.
Thank you. Next question, Sarah, we'll start with you. With the expansion of the tanker force at Eielson Air Force Base last year, Alaska has become one or the largest concentration of U.S. military forces. Alaska has long been lauded for its strategic relevance and the ability to reach nearly every geopolitical flashpoint in the world. As the importance of the Arctic increases, how do you plan to advocate for Alaska's role in national security?
Yeah, Alaska has always played an outsized role in America's national security. It's because of our strategic location. We are the air crossroads of the world, and we have to make sure that our bases are well equipped, that they're well funded, and that they're fully staffed. When it comes to Arctic resources, for instance, what has been happening in our country for years is kind of this ignorance of what other countries are doing in claiming Arctic resources that belong to us, to our people. Russia, they've been literally, physically undersea flagging areas where they're claiming resources that, again, they belong to us. And our administrations, present and past, have kind of ignored the issue. I believe that Alaska's delegation has tried to bring it to light and let people understand how important it is that we become aggressive. Again, these are national security issues, aggressive in securing our natural resources that other countries are thinking that they're going to claim. Alaska has got to be even more vocal, more prominent in this fight in order to put Alaska even brighter on the map when it comes to national security issues. And yeah, I get mocked for saying that you can see Russia from Alaska. Well, you can. In the mid-'80s, remember Lynn Cox? She swam between the two, Alaska, America, and Russia. So I'll take one for the team. I'll keep getting mocked for that, you guys. But we know how important Alaska is because of our strategic location.
Nick Begich, what else can you do to advocate for Alaska's role in national security?
Well, I think that as we see a militarization of the Arctic, particularly within Russia, we see a large presence established there. A number of former Soviet Union military installations have been reactivated in Russia. We see a tremendous investment by both Russia and China in terms of icebreakers to control and manage shipping routes that go right by our coastline. I think it's critical that if we are going to regain leadership in the Arctic, we make incremental investments, not just in our military presence in the state of Alaska, but also in our, I'm sorry, that threw me off a little bit. But also in our hard infrastructure. Because if you're going to maintain a state this large, you're going to have to do so by having a population and a hard infrastructure that allows you to access the state, to have a robust economy within the state that permits you to hold the land. We are the least densely populated state in the country, and we need economic growth in order to maintain our hold on Alaska over the long term.
Yeah, Julie, we're all on the same page on this question firmly.
Suddenly, everybody's phones are reacting
know.
to the answers.
I know. On the House Finance Committee, we had a rule if your cell phone went off, you had to buy donuts the next day. So
okay,
maybe
well.
next Monday, these folks will buy everybody some donuts. No, I am very, back to this very serious question. During the Cold War, after the Cold War, a lot of our resources were withdrawn, and a lot of the attention that was paid by the military in the Arctic was ratcheted back. And clearly this new tension that we're seeing in Russia reminds us we've got to strengthen ourselves in the military, in our military presence. We need increases in resources to the Air Force, the Army. We need new resources from the Navy here. I've got 2 sons who serve in the Coast Guard. One is in Oregon, one is in Florida. And I know they're not part of Department of Defense, but they are under Homeland Security. They are a critical part of our Homeland Security. I think we need to invest in more icebreakers and really establish our firm presence in the Arctic. And we are an Arctic nation because of Alaska. And, the Territorial Guard was a really big presence here. The whole reason we have the Alcan Highway was because of our strategic location. So this is a part of our identity, and we need to enhance it and strengthen ourselves as we go forward in this new dynamic internationally. Thank you.
Okay, Mary, I'm going to go ahead and start with you on this one. And you've answered part of it already, so I'm going to rewrite it just a tiny bit. You're sending President Biden home with a report card. What grade would you give him? And in the comments section, what would you say about how or where he might do better?
The Chamber of Commerce has always loved report cards. You guys are really attached to your report cards. I would give President Biden a B-, and that is because I like what the president has done to try to bring our country together. I will work with Congress, and he has worked with Congress to pass the infrastructure bill, which really was a benefit for Alaska, and I'm thankful to our delegation for supporting that. He has had a very firm stance against Russia regarding the invasion of Ukraine. But I do think he has been slow to recognize the impacts of inflation on our country. That's why I would give him a B-.
Sarah Palin?
And I'm from a family full of school teachers. I remember watching my dad late at night filling out report cards. And yeah, I agree that the chamber's kind of known for ratcheting down a lot of issues and wanting us to paint a picture when it comes to report cards. Now, with President Biden, there are just too many issues that he is failing at. He couldn't even stay awake during discussion on this baby formula shortage. There are just too many important issues that it seems his advisors or he himself, they're not taking seriously enough. And ultimately, that issue, that problem is hurting Alaskan families. I think that he has failed in too many areas. I'd have to give him that F on a report card. There are so many things that need to be improved upon, and it's not too late for him to wake up and listen to people who certainly have not just Alaska's best interest, but American hardworking family, our interest at heart. And there are so many things that he could be, should be doing, but thus far, it's been a failure.
So Joe Biden unequivocally receives a grade of F. Every presidency is marked with challenges and opportunities. And how one responds to those challenges and opportunities is the measure by which one is graded. And he has failed on his promises to unite the nation. He has failed on his promises to increase the standard of living for Americans. He's failed on his promises to grow the Main Street economy. He has picked winners and losers, and for those who are involved in industries that he views to be undesirable, you're out of luck. That's Joe Biden's America. We need to take back the House, we need to take back the Senate, and in 2024 we need to take back the presidency and show Alaska what it means to lead again, show America what it means to be strong again. I think this is critically important. And I will say, while he's failed to unite America in one respect, he's actually succeeded in another. We see the strongest level of support for the Republican tickets in the generic ballot than we've seen in decades. As a result, I think the American people are ready for new leadership. I'm ready to help provide that leadership on your behalf down in Washington, D.C.
All right, thank you. Now we're going to do a few lightning round questions, and all you're going to do is give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And there's a handful of them. There's about 10. So you guys ready? Are your thumbs ready? Okay. Do you support the Donlin Gold Project? ConocoPhillips Willow Project? Developing Anwar? The Pebble Project? That's okay, you can have a sideways. Do you support the Build Back Better bill as currently drafted? Do you support expanding the number of justices on the U.S. Supreme Court? Do you support term limits for Congress? Should Election Day be a national holiday? All right. Now a couple of fun ones. Does your 15-year-old self think you're cool? Oh, Nick says yeah. Yeah. And are dogs better than cats? Okay. Yeah, there was a boo. All right, before we go to closing statements, one last question for you. With Alaska now having ranked choice voting, who will you rank second on your ballot?
It's a secret ballot, I'll never
Yeah, really. That's a great answer.
Is that your answer, everybody? Secret ballot? I'm just checking. Any recommendations?
Sarah Palin.
Oh, okay, well then I have to reciprocate. But I love her. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so now you each have 1 minute for your closing statement. Sarah Palin, we'll start with you. Are you ready, the timer? Okay, go ahead.
I am just absolutely honored to even have the opportunity to run, asking if I can represent you. If I'm not sent to D.C., I'm going to keep on promoting Alaska. This is my home. This is my life. Other than family, faith, and freedom, for me, it's all about Alaska. I love the state that much. I'm very, very thankful that we have great candidates up here. You guys have good choices. Kind of can't go wrong when it comes to sending those willing and able to DC to represent Alaska's best interests. I'm just really happy to be a part of it. I would like that job. I would like to be able to work for you and with you, making sure Alaska's interests are put first. But if not, just know that, life goes on, and I'm going to keep promoting Alaska, and again, I'll keep taking one for the team out there on a national stage, even if I get mocked for bragging up Alaska everywhere I go.
Nick Begich?
At the end of the day, we have one representative in the U.S. Congress out of 435. That representative has to have the ability to work across the aisle and be a strong advocate for the state of Alaska and its strong potential, its role in solving so many of America's challenges. I believe we need to make a better business case for the state. And I believe when we do that, we'll be effective, we'll open up more of Alaska, we'll have economic prosperity that lasts for generations in the state. And I believe that's the promise that's brought so many people to Alaska, that's made people so excited about the state for so long, and it's part of the mystique of Alaska. What is possible? What is possible in the last frontier? What is North to the Future really about? Well, it's about our future. And we see an administration taking our future offline. We've got to do more to be a strong advocate for what we know we can do up here. We do it right. We do it well. I want to be that voice for you down in D.C., and I'd appreciate your first place vote as we head in to this August special general election. Thank you.
Mary Peltola, your closing statement.
Thank you. I was born and raised in Alaska. I have a long history here. My family has a long history here. I have a vested interest in our state. I served in the legislature for 10 years. I've had many jobs that have afforded me the opportunity to travel throughout our state. I've been to Dutch Harbor, I've been to Barrow, Southeast, throughout the state. And when I served in the legislature, I was on the Finance Committee, Resources Committee, Health and Education and Social Services. I was on the budget subcommittees for corrections and courts. I have worked in the private sector for 6 years. I've worked in the nonprofit sector. And the reason I'm running is because I've got 7 kids, and their future is also in Alaska. We all collectively have a vested interest in our state. I want to serve all Alaskans, regardless of party, regardless of gender, and regardless of ethnicity. I believe in one Alaska. Thank you.
Thank you. And can we give the candidates a round of response, or a round of applause?